March 14, 1945, 22,000 feet above Bielefeld, Germany. Flight Lieutenant John Pryor watched through his bomber's perspex nose as the massive concrete viaduct grew larger in his bomb sight. Behind him, deep in the Lancaster's bomb bay, sat something that would have terrified every German pilot within 50 miles if they'd known it was there. The Grand Slam. 22,000 pounds of high explosive encased in specially hardened steel. The largest conventional bomb ever built. So heavy that the Lancaster carrying it had been stripped of everything. No defensive guns except the tail turret. No mid-upper turret. Even the escape hatch had been removed to save weight. The aircraft was essentially a flying bomb truck, and if German fighters caught them, they'd be helpless. Pryor's pilot, squadron leader Charles Calder, held the big bomber steady. Below them, German anti-aircraft gunners were tracking their approach. They'd seen Lancasters before. Big, slow, lumbering targets. Easy meat if you caught them alone. What they didn't know was that this particular Lancaster could fly higher and faster than any bomber they'd encountered. And what it carried would reshape their understanding of what a single aircraft could do. The viaduct at Bielefeld was a masterpiece of German engineering. 270 feet long, spanning a valley that carried the main railway line between the Ruhr industrial region and Berlin. It had survived 32 separate bombing raids. Conventional bombs bounced off its reinforced concrete like pebbles. The Americans had tried with their flying fortresses. The RAF had hammered it with 1,000-pounders. Nothing worked. German engineers boasted it was indestructible. Barnes Wallis, the brilliant British engineer who designed the bouncing bomb that destroyed the Ruhr dams, had other ideas. He'd spent years calculating, testing, obsessing over a single concept. What if you didn't try to blow up a target? What if you created an earthquake instead? The Grand Slam was designed to penetrate deep into the earth before detonating. The shock wave would travel through the ground like a seismic event, liquefying soil, fracturing bedrock, and causing structures to collapse from below. It was revolutionary thinking, and it required a revolutionary bomber to deliver it. But the story of how the Lancaster became the only aircraft capable of carrying this monster bomb, and how German pilots learned to fear what they'd once dismissed as an easy target, began 3 years earlier in the skies over Germany. August 17, 1942, Hauptmann Wilhelm Fischer circled his Messerschmitt 109 above Augsburg at 15,000 feet. Below him, a formation of 12 British bombers was approaching in broad daylight. Lancasters. He'd heard about them but never seen one. Fischer radioed his wingman. "Look at the size of those things. Like flying barns. This will be simple." The Lancaster had entered service just 6 months earlier, replacing the inadequate Manchester bomber. To German eyes, it looked ungainly. 4 engines hung from wings that seemed impossibly long. The fuselage was deep and bulbous, built around a massive bomb bay. It appeared slow, vulnerable, designed for night bombing when fighters couldn't find it. Fischer dove to attack. What happened in the next 30 seconds would be repeated thousands of times over German skies in the coming years, and it never stopped surprising Luftwaffe pilots. The Lancaster's rear gunner, Sergeant Jack Thompson, saw Fischer coming. He swung his 4 Browning 303 machine guns onto target and opened fire. The Lancaster didn't just have 1 or 2 defensive positions like most bombers. It had 3 gun turrets, front, mid-upper, and rear, 10 machine guns total on early models. And British gunners were trained to a standard that German pilots consistently underestimated. Fischer's first burst went wide. Before he could line up for a second pass, Thompson's return fire stitched across his engine cowling. Fischer broke off, smoke trailing from his cooling system. His wingman, attacking from a different angle, fared worse. The mid-upper gunner and rear gunner caught him in a crossfire. His canopy shattered. He dove away, wounded. Of the 12 Lancasters that bombed Augsburg that day, 5 were lost. A terrible price. But 7 made it home despite flying in daylight deep into Germany without fighter escort. The German pilots who attacked them learned something important. The Lancaster was not an easy kill. What Fischer didn't know, what most German pilots wouldn't understand until it was too late, was that the Lancaster represented a fundamental shift in bomber design philosophy. The Germans had built bombers for tactical support. fast, agile aircraft that could work with ground forces. The British had built the Lancaster for one purpose: to carry the maximum possible bomb load to targets deep in Germany and survive the journey. The statistics were remarkable. The Lancaster could carry 14,000 pounds of bombs to Berlin and back. That was more than a flying fortress, more than any German bomber could dream of carrying. And it could do it regularly in all weathers, night after night. A.V. Rowe and Company, the manufacturer, had created something extraordinary. The wing design provided exceptional lift. The 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered Spitfires, gave it surprising speed for such a large aircraft. And the structure was both strong and light, using innovative stressed skin construction that was ahead of its time. But the real genius was in the bomb bay. Unlike American bombers that carried bombs on racks in divided compartments, the Lancaster had a single, huge, unobstructed bomb bay running almost the entire length of the fuselage, 33 feet long. It could carry anything the bomb designers could dream up. By late 1942, Lancasters were flying regular night missions over Germany. The Germans adapted their tactics. Night fighters equipped with radar began taking a steady toll. But even at night, the Lancaster proved harder to kill than expected. Oberleutnant Ludwig Fischer, no relation to Wilhelm, flew a Messerschmitt 110 night fighter equipped with the latest Liechtenstein radar. In January 1943, he intercepted a Lancaster over the Ruhr. His account, recorded in his combat log, revealed growing German respect for the British bomber. Close to 300 meters before opening fire, the rear gunner spotted us despite darkness. His return fire was accurate and intense. I scored hits on the starboard wing, but the Lancaster did not burn. It did not fall apart. The pilot threw the aircraft into a corkscrew maneuver that I thought impossible for such a large bomber. I lost visual contact, and by the time I reacquired on radar, they'd descended into the clouds. These British crews are skilled, and their aircraft is tougher than it appears. The Lancaster's defensive tactics became legendary. The corkscrew maneuver, a violent spiraling dive and climb that threw off a fighter's aim, was particularly effective. It required enormous strength from the pilot and coordination from the entire crew. And it worked. German night fighter pilots learned that shooting down a Lancaster was never guaranteed, even when they achieved perfect position. By mid-1943, Lancasters were the backbone of RAF Bomber Command. They flew more sorties, dropped more bombs, and suffered fewer losses per mission than any other heavy bomber in the European theater. Production ramped up to incredible levels. At peak production, British factories were completing 1 Lancaster every single day. The Germans noticed. Intelligence reports from shot-down Lancaster crews revealed the bomber's capabilities. Luftwaffe Command issued tactical bulletins. The Lancaster was to be treated with respect. It was fast for a heavy bomber, capable of 280 miles per hour at altitude. It could fly at 24,000 feet, high enough to make interception difficult. And it could take punishment that would destroy 2 conventional bombers. Flight Sergeant Ron Clark's Lancaster was hit by flak over Essen in April 1943. An 88mm shell exploded just behind the cockpit, tearing a hole in the fuselage large enough to see through. The blast killed the flight engineer instantly. Shrapnel wounded 2 other crew members. The hydraulics were destroyed. 2 engines were damaged. The aircraft was essentially flying wreckage. Clark got it home, 300 miles back to England with half the control surfaces shot away. He landed without hydraulics, meaning no brakes and no flaps. The Lancaster slid off the runway and collapsed its undercarriage. But all 6 surviving crew members walked away. The ground crew counted 417. Holes in the airframe. One mechanic told Clark, "Sir, I've no idea what's holding this together. It should have fallen out of the sky over Germany." That was the Lancaster, tough beyond belief. And it was about to get a job that would prove just how tough. Barnes Wallis was obsessed. The mild-mannered engineer who designed the Wellington bomber and the famous bouncing bomb had become fixated on a new idea: earthquake bombs. Traditional bombs exploded on impact or just after penetration. They relied on blast and fragmentation to destroy targets. But what if a bomb could penetrate deep underground before exploding? The shock wave traveling through earth and bedrock would be far more destructive than a surface blast. Wallace had calculated it all. A 10-ton bomb dropped from sufficient altitude would penetrate up to 100 feet into the earth. When it detonated, the explosion would create a camouflage, a huge underground cavity. The roof of this cavity would collapse, creating subsidence that would pull down any structure above it. Bridges would fall, bunkers would crack, viaducts would crumble. The Air Ministry was skeptical. A 10-ton bomb impossible. No aircraft could carry it. And even if one could, what target justified such an expensive, specialized weapon? Wallace was patient. He started smaller. The Tall Boy Bomb, 12,000 pounds, 21 feet long, streamlined like a dart to achieve supersonic speed in its fall, filled with Torpex explosive, far more powerful than conventional TNT, and designed with a thick steel casing that would allow it to penetrate before detonating. The problem was delivery. No existing bomber could carry 12,000 pounds. The Lancaster could carry 14,000 pounds total, but that was in the form of multiple smaller bombs spread across racks. A single 12,000-pound bomb would be too heavy, too large, too awkward. Roy Chadwick, the Lancaster's chief designer, looked at Wallace's specifications and smiled. "We can modify it." The modification was radical. Strengthen the bomb bay. Remove the bomb bay doors entirely, letting the Tall Boy sit partially exposed beneath the fuselage. Strip out the mid-upper gun turret to save weight. Remove armor plating. Take out equipment. Every pound saved was a pound more bomb. The modified Lancaster could just barely carry a Tall Boy, but it required exceptional skill to fly. The bomb's weight shifted the center of gravity. The aircraft handled differently. Taking off was nerve-wracking, using almost every foot of runway. In June 1944, 6 Lancasters of 617 Squadron, specially modified to carry Tall Boys, attacked the Saumur railway tunnel in France. German panzer divisions were trying to reach Normandy after D-Day. The tunnel was their fastest route. Squadron leader Leonard Cheshire, one of the RAF's most decorated pilots, marked the target with flares. The 6 Tall Boy armed Lancasters bombed from 18,000 feet. The result stunned everyone. One Tall Boy struck next to the tunnel entrance. It penetrated 80 feet into the hillside before exploding. The entire hillside collapsed. 10,000 tons of rock and earth buried the tunnel entrance. Another Tall Boy hit near the middle of the tunnel. The shock wave, traveling through solid rock, fractured the tunnel roof. It collapsed along 200 feet of its length. The tunnel was unusable. German armor sat trapped on the wrong side, unable to reach the battle. It would take 8 months to clear and repair. 1 raid, 6 bombs. Strategic impact far beyond their weight in conventional explosives. German engineers inspecting the damage couldn't believe what they saw. One report to OKW, the German High Command, described it as a new type of weapon creating effects similar to natural seismic events. Conventional air raid shelters and fortifications may be inadequate against this threat. Wallace had proven his concept. Now he wanted to build the ultimate earthquake bomb, the Grand Slam. 22,000 pounds, 25 feet long, 3 feet 10 inches in diameter. A bomb so large that building it required special factories with reinforced floors. A bomb so heavy that moving it required special trailers with extra axles. A bomb so expensive that each one cost the same as a small ship. The Grand Slam was designed to be dropped from at least 22,000 feet. As it fell, it would accelerate past the speed of sound. The hardened steel casing would allow it to penetrate up to 130 feet into the earth before the delayed fuse triggered detonation. The explosion of nearly 10,000 pounds of Torpex would create an underground cavity 60 feet across. The subsequent collapse would create a crater big enough to swallow a house, and the seismic shock would propagate through bedrock for hundreds of yards in all directions. It was the culmination of Wallace's earthquake bomb concept, and only 1 aircraft in the world could carry it. A specially modified Lancaster. The modification was even more extreme than the Tall Boy version. The bomb bay doors were permanently removed. The Grand Slam hung partially exposed beneath the fuselage, its nose protruding below the plane like a steel torpedo. The mid-upper turret was removed. The front turret was removed. All armor was stripped out. Even the paint was sanded off to save weight. These modified Lancasters, operated by 617 Squadron, were the most specialized bomber aircraft in history. They couldn't carry anything except 1 Grand Slam. They were virtually defenseless except for the rear turret. They existed for one purpose only: to destroy targets that conventional bombing couldn't touch. Wing Commander James Bazin, commanding 617 Squadron, described the experience of flying a Grand Slam mission. The takeoff was terrifying every single time. You'd use every inch of runway, the engine screaming at full power, the bomb hanging. Beneath you, like an anchor, the aircraft didn't want to fly. You'd coax it into the air with pure will and perfect technique. One mistake, and you'd cartwheel across the airfield with 11 tons of high explosive attached to your belly. The first Grand Slam was dropped on March 13, 1945. The target was the Bielefeld Viaduct, the same viaduct that had survived 32 previous raids. Squadron leader Charles Calder piloted the Lancaster. Flight Lieutenant John Pryor served as bomb aimer. They climbed to 22,000 feet, higher than most Lancasters ever flew operationally. At that altitude, the modified bomber could barely maintain height. The 4 Merlin engines were working at maximum continuous power just to stay level. German radar picked them up. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled fighters. But the Lancaster was flying too high and too fast. The stripped-down bomber, freed of several tons of defensive equipment and armor, could reach 295 miles per hour at altitude. German fighters climbing to intercept burned enormous fuel, getting to 22,000 feet. By the time they arrived, the Lancaster was already overhead, already dropping. Pryor lined up the viaduct in his bomb sight. Steady, steady, bombs gone. The Grand Slam fell away. It accelerated rapidly, its streamlined shape cutting through the air. By the time it struck the earth next to the viaduct's southern pier, it was traveling faster than sound. The bomb penetrated 90 feet into the clay soil. The delayed fuse waited 1/10 of a second, just long enough for maximum penetration. Then nearly 10,000 pounds of Torpex detonated underground. The explosion created a seismic shock measuring 4.5 on the Richter scale. It was felt 12 miles away. The underground cavity collapsed instantly, creating a crater 100 feet across and 50 feet deep. The shock wave traveled through the earth and struck the viaduct's foundation. The southern span of the viaduct dropped into the crater. The northern span cracked and twisted. Within seconds, the entire structure collapsed. 270 feet of reinforced concrete that had withstood 32 bombing raids was reduced to rubble by a single bomb. German forces in the area couldn't believe it. Oberst Heinrich Miller, commanding the local flak defenses, wrote in his after-action report, "One aircraft, one bomb, total destruction of a structure we believed indestructible. This is not strategic bombing as we understood it. This is precision demolition from 6 miles up." The psychological impact was immediate. If the British could destroy the Bielefeld Viaduct with one bomb from one aircraft, what else could they destroy? Between March 13th and April 25th, 1945, RAF 617 Squadron dropped 41 Grand Slam bombs on 41 targets. Each mission was meticulously planned. Each target was a structure that conventional bombing had failed to destroy. U-boat pens with 20-foot-thick reinforced concrete roofs, railway viaducts, bridge foundations, underground factories. The success rate was extraordinary. 35 of 41 targets were completely destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The 6 missions that failed still caused significant damage. In 6 weeks, one squadron with specially modified Lancasters accomplished what thousands of conventional bombing raids had attempted and failed. The Germans tried everything to stop them. They reinforced fighter defenses around critical targets. They positioned their best anti-aircraft batteries. They even attempted to build decoy structures, hoping the British would waste their expensive Grand Slams on fakes. Nothing worked. The Lancasters flew too high, the stripped-down aircraft were too fast, and the bomb aimers of 617 Squadron were the best in Bomber Command, selected specifically for their exceptional skill. On March 27, 1945, 2 Lancasters attacked the Arbergen Railway Bridge near Bremen. German intelligence had learned about the Grand Slam attacks. Luftwaffe Command sent every available fighter to defend the bridge. Hauptmann Franz Stiegler, a veteran ace who'd been fighting since 1940, led the interception. He'd flown against every Allied bomber type. He expected the Lancasters to be lumbering, defensive targets like the ones he'd fought throughout the war. What he encountered shocked him. The 2 Lancasters were flying at 24,000 feet, higher than he'd ever seen heavy bombers operate. They were moving at nearly 300 miles per hour. His Focke-Wulf 190, already struggling at that altitude, couldn't close the distance. He tried anyway, pushing his engine to maximum power. His wingmen followed. They climbed desperately, burning fuel at an unsustainable rate. By the time Stigler reached 23,000 feet, the Lancasters had already bombed. 2 Grand Slams fell toward the bridge. The Lancasters were turning for home, descending slightly, picking up speed. Stigler's guns had range. He opened fire from 800 yards, knowing it was futile at that distance. His cannon shells fell short. The Lancasters pulled away effortlessly. Below, both Grand Slams struck within 50 feet of the bridge foundations. The double shock wave liquefied the soil supporting the northern bank. The entire approach span collapsed into the river. The bridge twisted and fell. Stigler's after-action report was unusually detailed. These were not the Lancasters we have fought for 3 years. These aircraft have been modified for extreme altitude and speed. They carry single bombs of extraordinary power. Interception is nearly impossible. They fly above our effective ceiling. They are faster than our fighters at altitude. And what they carry destroys targets we believed safe from air attack. I submit that we have no adequate defense against this threat. The Luftwaffe's assessment was accurate. In 41 Grand Slam missions, not a single Lancaster was shot down by fighters. 2 were damaged by flak, but both made it home. The combination of altitude, speed, and the aircraft's legendary toughness made them nearly invulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on British crews. The Lancaster, once dismissed by German pilots as a slow, easy target, had evolved into something they couldn't catch and couldn't kill. German engineers examining bombed targets struggled to understand what they were seeing. The damage patterns made no sense according to conventional understanding of aerial bombardment. At the Arnsberg Viaduct, destroyed by a single Grand Slam on March 19th, engineers found the crater first. It was enormous. 100 feet across, 60 feet deep, perfectly circular, but the viaduct was 30 yards away from the crater. How had an explosion that missed by 30 yards destroyed such a massive structure? Then they examined the foundation. Deep cracks radiated from the crater through bedrock. The viaduct's foundations had fractured underground. The structure hadn't been blown up. It had been undermined. The weight of the viaduct itself had pulled it down into the weakened earth. Dr. Heinrich Braun, a civil engineer assigned to assess bomb damage, wrote in his technical report, "This represents a fundamental change in bombardment methodology. Traditional bombs destroy through blast and fragmentation. These weapons destroy through seismic shock. The bomb need not strike the target directly. It creates an earthquake that collapses structures from below. I have no recommendations for hardening existing structures against this threat. Conventional air raid protection is inadequate." The U-boat pens at Farge provided another example. These bunkers had been built to withstand anything. The roof was 23 feet of reinforced concrete. 16 feet of that was solid concrete. The remaining 7 feet was honeycomb construction designed to absorb bomb blasts. The walls were equally massive. On March 27th, 4 Lancasters attacked with tallboys and Grand Slams. None of the bombs struck the roof directly. 2 Grand Slams impacted next to the structure. They penetrated deep into the earth before detonating. The seismic shock cracked the foundation. The massive concrete structure, weighing thousands of tons, settled unevenly. Cracks appeared in the walls. The roof sagged. Water began seeping in. The bunker was unusable. German Naval Command was horrified. They'd spent millions of marks building these bunkers. They'd diverted critical resources and labor. The bunkers were supposed to be invulnerable. One raid with specialized bombs had negated all that investment. Kapitän zur See Werner Hartmann inspected the damage personally. His report to Naval High Command was blunt. "The British have rendered our bunker construction program obsolete. They do not attempt to penetrate the roof. They attack the foundation. Against this, we have no defense. Building thicker roofs is pointless. The enemy simply detonates larger bombs deeper underground. I recommend we cease bunker construction and disperse our facilities." The strategic implications were enormous. Germany had invested massively in hardened structures, believing them safe from air attack. The Grand Slam proved that assumption false. Nothing was safe. Not bunkers, not viaducts, not bridges, not underground factories. If the British wanted it destroyed badly enough, 1 Lancaster with 1 Grand Slam could do it. The crews of 617 Squadron were hand-picked. Every pilot had extensive operational experience. Every bomb aimer was selected for exceptional accuracy. Every navigator was the best available. Flying Grand Slam missions required perfection. There was no room for error. Squadron leader Jerry Falk flew multiple Grand Slam missions. His logbook recorded each one with clinical precision, but in a letter to his wife, he described what it was really like. Taking off with that monster underneath is an experience I'll never forget. You can feel the aircraft protesting. It doesn't want to fly. You hold it on the runway until the last possible second, building speed, and then you pull back on the controls with everything you have. The Lancaster reluctantly, grudgingly, lifts into the air. For the first few minutes, you're not sure if you're climbing or just delaying the inevitable crash. Then the engines settle into their rhythm, and you start to believe you might make it. The flight to the target is tense. You're climbing slowly, very slowly to altitude. Every foot of height takes effort. You watch the altimeter creep upward. 18,000 feet, 19,000, 20,000. The aircraft is at its absolute limit. The engines are screaming. You're burning fuel at an alarming rate just to maintain height. And then you reach the target. The bomb aimer takes over. You hold the aircraft steady, straight and level, no matter what. Flak is bursting around you. You know German fighters might be climbing to intercept, but you hold steady. The bomb aimer calls corrections. Left, left, steady. Right a touch, steady. And then, bomb's gone. The aircraft leaps upward when the Grand Slam releases. Suddenly you're 10 tons lighter. The Lancaster practically jumps into the sky. You can climb again. You can maneuver. You can run for home. That moment of release is like being freed from chains. Not every mission went perfectly. On April 9, 1945, flying officer Peter Martin's Lancaster suffered an engine failure during the bomb run. With one engine dead and 22,000 pounds of high explosives still in the bomb bay, Martin faced an impossible choice. He couldn't maintain altitude on 3 engines with the Grand Slam attached. He couldn't land with it. The weight would collapse the landing gear even if he somehow got the aircraft down. He couldn't jettison it safely over Germany, not knowing where it would land. Martin held the aircraft steady and let the bomb aimer complete his run. The Grand Slam dropped on target, destroying a railway bridge. Then Martin turned for home, descending slowly. Nursing his 3 remaining engines, he made it to Allied-controlled territory before running out of altitude. The crew bailed out over France. The Lancaster crashed in an empty field. Everyone survived. Martin's decision to complete the mission despite the engine failure earned him a Distinguished Flying Cross. But he was more honest in private. "I wasn't being brave. I just wanted that bloody bomb off my aircraft. The only safe way to get rid of it was to drop it where it was supposed to go." The effectiveness of the Grand Slam and Tallboy earthquake bombs can be measured in cold statistics. 19 hardened targets that had survived multiple conventional bombing raids were destroyed by earthquake bombs in single attacks. These included railway viaducts at Bielefeld, Arnsberg, Nienburg, and Vlotho, railway bridges at Bremen, Nienburg, and Hamburg, U-boat pens at Farge and Hamburg, underground factories at Pölitz and Lützgendorf. The economic calculation was remarkable. A single Grand Slam cost approximately 7,000 pounds sterling to manufacture. A conventional 1,000-pound bomb cost about 50 pounds. So one Grand Slam cost the same as 140 conventional bombs. But consider the results. The Bielefeld Viaduct had been attacked 32 times with conventional bombs. Thousands of bombs dropped, hundreds of aircraft committed, dozens of aircrew lost. The viaduct remained operational. One Grand Slam destroyed it completely. From an economic perspective, the Grand Slam was extraordinarily cost-effective. It delivered results that conventional bombing couldn't achieve at any price. The Germans understood this perfectly. In the final months of the war, as Allied forces advanced into Germany, retreating German troops were ordered to demolish bridges and viaducts to slow the advance. Engineers discovered that structures destroyed by Grand Slams were impossible to repair quickly. The damage was too extensive, too deep, too complete. A bridge blown up by conventional explosives could sometimes be repaired in days. Temporary spans could be erected. Alternative routes could be constructed. A structure destroyed by a Grand Slam was gone. The foundation was fractured. The approaches had collapsed. There was nothing to repair. You had to start from scratch. This had strategic implications. Every Grand Slam dropped on a railway viaduct or bridge removed that link from Germany's transportation network permanently. There would be no quick fixes, no temporary repairs. The damage was irreversible within any meaningful time frame. As the war entered its final weeks, 617 Squadron continued flying. The targets became more specific, more critical: underground oil refineries that conventional bombing couldn't touch, command bunkers buried beneath mountains, railway tunnels carrying vital supplies. On April 19, 1945, 8 days before the end of the war in Europe, Squadron Leader John Fauquier led a formation of Lancasters against the Heligoland naval base. This was a coastal fortress that had been fortified for decades. Underground tunnels connected massive concrete bunkers. Coastal artillery positions were protected by walls 20 feet thick. 5 Lancasters carried Grand Slams. 3 carried Tallboys. They attacked from 24,000 feet. The earthquake bombs penetrated deep into the island's bedrock before detonating. The seismic shocks were so powerful that buildings 5 miles away reported cracked walls and shattered windows. On Heligoland itself, the damage was catastrophic. Underground tunnels collapsed. Bunker roofs cracked. Artillery positions were buried under rubble. The naval base became unusable. German sailors evacuated to the mainland. A fortress that had been considered impregnable was abandoned after a single air raid. The commander of the base, Kapitän zur See Werner Lange, surrendered to British forces on May 4th. In his interrogation, he was asked about the April 19th raid. His response was recorded in the official report. "We had survived 4 years of bombing. Thousands of conventional bombs had struck Heligoland. We repaired the damage and continued operations. Then your earthquake bombs arrived. The island itself shook. Men thought it was an earthquake. Buildings that had stood for a century collapsed. Our tunnels became death traps. We lost more men to those 8 bombs than we had lost to 4 years of conventional raids. There was no point staying. The base was finished." The last Grand Slam of the war was dropped on April 25, 1945, less than 2 weeks before Germany surrendered. The target was a railway viaduct near Berchtesgaden, close to Hitler's mountain retreat. The viaduct carried supplies to German forces in the Alps. Flight Lieutenant Robert Langston piloted the Lancaster. He'd flown dozens of combat missions, but this was his first Grand Slam drop. He later described it in an interview. "I'd heard stories from other crews, but I wasn't quite prepared for the reality. The takeoff was absolutely terrifying. We used every foot of runway at Woodhall Spa. I thought we were going to run out of pavement. Somehow, we staggered into the air. The climb to altitude took forever. We were flying at maximum weight, maximum power, minimum safety margin. Over the target, the flak was intense. They knew what we were carrying by then. They knew that one bomb could do enormous damage. Every gun in the valley was firing at us. I held the aircraft steady while my bomb aimer lined up the shot. The seconds felt like hours. Then the Grand Slam released, and suddenly we could fly again. The Lancaster practically leaped into the sky. We never saw where the bomb hit. There was cloud cover, but the crew in another Lancaster behind us reported seeing the explosion. They said a section of mountainside simply disappeared. The viaduct collapsed into a crater. One bomb, one structure destroyed. That's what we'd learned to do. When the war ended, Allied intelligence teams examined German records and interrogated engineers and officers. The testimony consistently revealed that earthquake bombs had achieved strategic effects far beyond their numbers. Only 41 Grand Slams were dropped during the war, but those 41 bombs destroyed or severely damaged 41 targets. That's a 100% effectiveness rate that no other weapon system came close to matching. The psychological impact was equally significant. German military commanders had spent the war believing that certain structures were safe from air attack. Bunkers with 20-foot concrete roofs, viaducts built into mountainsides, underground factories carved into solid rock. The earthquake bombs shattered that assumption. General der Flieger Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, was asked after the war about the weapons that had most impacted German operations. His answer surprised many. "Everyone expects me to say the Mustang fighter or the Flying Fortress bomber, but I believe the British earthquake bombs were more significant. They destroyed targets we thought were indestructible. They rendered our entire hardening program worthless. We had invested enormous resources building concrete bunkers and fortified structures. The British demonstrated they could destroy any of them with a single aircraft carrying a single bomb. That changed our strategic calculations completely." The technical achievement was extraordinary. Barnes-Wallis had conceived a weapon based on advanced mathematics and seismology. A.V. Rowe had modified the Lancaster to carry it. RAF crews had delivered it with devastating accuracy. Together, they'd created a weapon system that couldn't be countered. The Germans tried to develop their own earthquake bombs late in the war. The designs never progressed beyond paper. They lacked the engineering expertise, the manufacturing capacity, and most critically, they lacked an aircraft capable of carrying such a weapon. The Lancaster was unique. The Avro Lancaster flew 156,000 operational sorties during the war. The aircraft dropped more than 600,000 tons of bombs on European targets. Of the 7,377 Lancasters built, 3,349 were lost on operations. The casualty rate among Lancaster crews was appalling. 55,000 aircrew served in Bomber Command during the war. Nearly half, 24,000 men, were killed. But the survivors knew they'd flown the best heavy bomber of the war. American pilots respected the Flying Fortress and Liberator. German crews admired the Heinkel and Junkers bombers. British airmen loved the Lancaster with a passion that defied logic. It wasn't the most heavily armed bomber. American aircraft had more guns. It wasn't the fastest. The Mosquito was quicker. It wasn't the most survivable. Statistically, other aircraft had better loss rates. But the Lancaster could carry the heaviest loads, fly the longest missions, and deliver bombs more accurately than anything else in the sky. And in its specialized Grand Slam configuration, it could destroy targets that nothing else could touch. The Germans had assumed the Lancaster was slow because it was large. They assumed it was vulnerable because it was built for night operations. They assumed it was just another heavy bomber, not fundamentally different from the Stirlings and Halifaxes they'd been fighting. They were wrong on every count. The Lancaster was faster than they expected, tougher than they imagined, and capable of carrying weapons they'd never anticipated. By the time they understood what they were facing, it was too late. The Grand Slam missions represented the ultimate evolution of the Lancaster concept. Take the best heavy bomber in the European theater, strip it down to absolute essentials, load it with the most powerful conventional bomb ever built, fly it to extreme altitude, drop the bomb with perfect accuracy, one aircraft, one bomb, one destroyed target. It was precision strategic bombing taken to its logical conclusion. And it worked. The earthquake bombs were used once more after the war. In 1947, British engineers needed to demolish the damaged Arnsberg Viaduct. Conventional demolition would have been dangerous and expensive. Instead, they rolled a Grand Slam into position beneath one of the remaining spans and detonated it remotely. The viaduct collapsed exactly as Barnes-Wallis had predicted. The seismic shock fractured the foundations. The weight of the structure pulled it down. One bomb, even when detonated on the surface rather than dropped from altitude, was sufficient to destroy what conventional methods struggled with. Today, only one Grand Slam survives. It's on display at the RAF Museum in London. 22,000 pounds of steel and high explosive, never dropped, never detonated. Visitors stand beside it and marvel at the size. It's difficult to believe that something so massive could have been carried by an aircraft. It's difficult to imagine the skill required to build it, modify an aircraft to carry it, fly that aircraft to target, and deliver the bomb with accuracy. But that's exactly what happened 41 times in the final months of the war. 41 missions, 41 Grand Slams dropped, 41 targets destroyed or damaged beyond repair. A success rate that remains unmatched in the history of strategic bombing. The Avro Lancaster entered service as a conventional heavy bomber. It evolved into the most effective strategic bombing platform of the war, and in its final incarnation, carrying earthquake bombs that weighed as much as a bus, it became something unique in military history, an aircraft that could destroy anything, anywhere, with a single strike. German pilots had laughed at it in 1942, called it slow, called it vulnerable, called it an easy target. By 1945, they'd learned the truth. The Lancaster wasn't slow, it was unstoppable, and what it carried could reshape the landscape. That's the story of how the aircraft Germany underestimated became the bomber they feared most. The story of how British engineering created a weapon that couldn't be countered. And the story of how 62 brave men in 617 Squadron delivered earthquakes from the sky. They flew the missions nobody else could fly. They carried bombs nobody else could carry. They destroyed targets nobody else could touch. They were the Earthquake Squadron, and they proved that sometimes one Lancaster with one bomb really could change everything.